Mocked by her ex for being still without a husband, she walks away with her pride intact, until fate pulls her into the hidden vampire realm. When she unexpectedly becomes the bride of the most powerful vampire king, the man who humiliated her realizes too late, she didn't lose anything, she ascended. The first time Liora heard the phrase again, it wasn't even spoken aloud. It arrived the way old words often did, soft as dust, uninvited, clinging to her mind while her hands worked. No husband yet. She was polishing the tall mirror in the east gallery of Nightmare Palace, where the glass held a faint silver tint and the frames were carved with vines that never wilted. Dawn was still hours away. The palace belonged to the night, and so did most of the people who moved through it with soundless steps and calm, unreadable faces. Liora's reflection looked ordinary in that strange place, a plain wool dress, hairpin tight, sleeves rolled to the elbow because work required it. If the mirror had been kinder, it might have shown her as stronger than she felt. But it only returned the simple truth: she was a human servant in the court of a vampire king, and every part of her life seemed to have drifted far from where she once imagined it would go. She had come here after the broken engagement, after the village whispers turned friendly greetings into questions that cut. She'd come because her mother's cough needed medicine and the apothecary would no longer take promises. She'd come because the palace paid in real coin, and because distance, she told herself, was sometimes the only way to breathe. Still, there were nights, quiet, candlelit, too full of echoes, when she could almost hear her former betrothed laughing as if it were happening beside her. No husband yet, he had said the last time she saw him, leaning against the fence outside her mother's cottage with the easy confidence of a man who believed he could define someone else's worth. Maybe you're too careful. Maybe you'll end up alone. Liora had not shouted back. She had not begged him to understand. She had simply lifted her chin, as if dignity were a shawl she could wrap around herself, and walked inside. Now, in a palace that smelled faintly of rosewater and cold stone, she tried to keep that same chin lifted. She tried to be steady. A footstep sounded behind her, human, heavier than the whisper-like tread of the palace's immortal residents. Mara from the laundry hall came carrying a basket of linens, her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the washing room. "You up early again?" Mara murmured, setting the basket down. She lowered her voice out of habit, even though the gallery was empty. "You'll wear yourself thin." Liora gave a small smile. "If I don't do it, the mirror will." Mara's smile was brief. "Did you get a letter today?" The courier came through the servants' gate. Liora's stomach tightened. "Not yet." Mara hesitated, then fished a folded page from her apron. This was mixed in with ours. "Your name's written small." Liora took it carefully, as if paper could bruise. The wax seal was her mother's, an uneven press of a worn stamp. She didn't open it right away. She pressed it to her palm and let the familiar shape remind her why she was here. "Thank you," she said. Mara's gaze softened. "Read it when you can. And, Liora, don't let this place make you feel smaller than you are." As Mara left, her basket lighter, the words lingered in the air. Liora watched the far end of the gallery, where the corridor curved into shadow and the palace's deeper rooms began. Beyond those shadows lay the grand hall where the vampire king sometimes held court. Sometimes. Not often. King Alaric was spoken of the way weather was spoken of, quietly, respectfully, as a force that shaped everything without needing to announce itself. Liora had seen him only once, across a sea of pillars and candlelight. He had stood behind a thin veil of dark gauze, presence more than a face. The court had bowed. The air had seemed to still. And then he had been gone again, leaving only the sense that the palace had noticed her breathing. That was all. She unfolded her mother's letter at last, fingers careful. "My Liora," it read, "I'm better this week. The tea you paid for helps. Don't worry for me. Worry for yourself. Eat enough. Rest when you can. And don't let anyone's words decide your worth." Liora's throat tightened on the last line. She folded the letter slowly and tucked it into the inner pocket of her apron, close to her heart where it could warm. Worth. That was the word that haunted her more than the question of marriage ever had. In the palace, Worth had many costumes. It wore embroidered robes at court. It wore heavy rings and names that opened doors. It wore fangs that never dulled and eyes that seemed to hold centuries. Liora's worth, she feared, was measured in polished floors and washed cups and how quickly she could lower her gaze. Yet she had learned, in small daily moments, that the palace was not cruel by nature. It was simply old, and it ran on rules set long before she was born. Human servants were allowed because there were tasks even immortals did not bother with: bread to bake, linens to mend, ledgers to keep. The vampires drank from crystal decanters of dark wine infused with herbs, not from the throats of the living. The very fact of it felt like a quiet agreement: we will not harm you, if you keep the palace steady. And Liora, who had come to avoid being defined by anyone, found herself wanting to keep that agreement clean. Her days took shape in small duties. She carried trays to the library where the lamps burned blue instead of gold. She dusted the music room where an untouched harp stood near the window as if someone might return to it any night. She learned the palace's rhythms, when the corridors were safest for humans, when the vampire courtiers walked through in a slow tide of silk, when the kitchens became lively with the warmth of bread and gossip. In the kitchen, Wren the gardener would sometimes trade sprigs of night-blooming thyme for extra rolls. He was older than her father would have been, his hands always smelling of soil even inside stone walls. "You look like you're thinking too hard," Wren told her one evening as she helped stack pans. "This palace will swallow a person who lives only in their head. Let your body live, too. Eat. Laugh. Speak. Speak." Liora echoed, surprised. Wren shrugged. "Words are small tools. People forget that. But tools can build, or they can bruise." Liora tried to remember that, though speaking was the hardest tool for her to pick up. She had learned to keep her head down in her village when questions turned sharp. She had learned that if you didn't argue, people grew bored. She had learned to swallow tears like bitter medicine. But Nightmare Palace had a different kind of silence, one that made her own thoughts louder. And then came the moment when silence was no longer enough. It began as a tiny problem, almost laughably mundane in a palace of immortal nobility: a missing ledger. Liora worked 2 evenings a week in the house accounts, a small room lined with shelves of parchment and jars of ink. Most of the figures were simple: flour, lamp oil, soap, candles. Human supplies, mostly. It suited her. Numbers didn't sneer. They didn't ask why she was unmarried. That night, the chief steward, Lord Soren, arrived with brisk steps and a smile that never reached his eyes. He was a vampire of lesser rank, important enough to command servants, not important enough to sit near the king. His pale hands were covered in thin gloves, as if the world might stain him. "Liora," he said, setting a sealed packet on the desk. We'll need this recorded and copied before midnight. She unwrapped it and felt her brow crease. These are the winter rations for the human staff, she said. But the totals are correct, Soren interrupted smoothly. You needn't trouble yourself. The palace is hosting guests. Numbers shift. Liora's eyes moved over the columns again. Flour listed that would not arrive. Medicine that had not been requested. A tidy change in ink color in one corner, as if someone had rewritten a line with careful patience. It was not her place, she reminded herself. Not her place to question a steward. Still, her mother's letter warmed against her chest like a small flame. Don't let anyone's words decide your worth. And Ren's voice echoed, tools can build. Liora swallowed. If the totals are wrong, Mara's haul will go short, she said quietly. The washerwomen already share soap. Soren's smile sharpened by a fraction. You are kind, he said, as if kindness were a childish habit. But you are not paid to worry. Copy the ledger, and sign at the bottom. The pen felt heavy in her hand. Signing would make it official. It would place her name under numbers she did not believe. It would make her complicit in something small but real, something that would ripple into hungry evenings and cold hands and Mara apologizing to the others for shortages she hadn't caused. Soren leaned closer, his voice low and pleasant. I've heard you are still unattached, he said, and the word carried the same sting as her ex's laughter, only dressed in silk. You know, a steady servant can earn favors here. Comfort. Security. If you're wise. For a breath, shame rose in her, hot and familiar. The old instinct returned, lower your gaze, agree, disappear. She imagined the village again, the fence, her ex's grin. No husband yet. The pen hovered over the parchment. Then Liora set it down. My lord, she said, voice steady enough to surprise her, I can copy what you bring me. But I won't sign what I cannot stand behind. Silence fell. Not dramatic, not thunderous, just a simple pause where the lamp seemed to burn a little louder. Soren's eyes narrowed. Do you understand what you're risking? I do, Liora replied, and felt the truth of it in her bones. She did understand. Humans in the palace were protected by custom, but customs could be bent. A steward could make life miserable without ever raising a hand. He could assign her to the coldest corridors, to the heaviest work, to the shifts that left no time to rest. He could send her away. Yet the choice had settled inside her as calmly as a stone placed in water. I won't sign, she repeated. Soren's gloved fingers tapped the desk once. Then you will report to the Knight Chancellor at the next audit, he said softly. And explain why a human servant thinks herself qualified to question the palace's accounts. He left without another word, the packet still on the desk like a dare. Liora sat alone for a long moment, staring at the ink. Her hands trembled, not with fear exactly, but with the strange shock of having used her voice. When she rose, she did not run. She returned the packet to its seal, tied it carefully, and placed it in the locked drawer where disputed records were kept. Then she went to the laundry hall. Mara looked up from a steaming basin, startled. What's wrong? Liora drew a slow breath. There may be shortages, she said. Not from you. From the accounts. If anyone asks, tell the truth. I will, too. Mara's face tightened with worry. "Liora, you'll get in trouble." "I know." Mara stared at her for a long heartbeat, then reached out and squeezed her wrist. "Brief, warm, human." "Then I'll stand with you," she said. The next night, the audit was held in a narrow chamber off the Grand Hall, a place servants were rarely invited. Liora's stomach twisted as she entered. The Night Chancellor, Lady Vesper, sat at a long table with 2 scribes. She was a vampire, elegant and severe, her hair silver black like polished metal. She did not look unkind, only precise. Lord Soren stood near the wall, his expression composed. Liora clasped her hands to keep them from shaking. She reminded herself that courage did not have to roar. Sometimes it simply stood. Lady Vesper's gaze rested on her. "You refused to sign the ration ledger." "Yes, my lady." "Why?" Liora spoke carefully, choosing words the way she chose stitches when mending, a steady thread, no unnecessary flourish. She explained the discrepancies. She pointed to the rewritten line. She described the likely result: fewer supplies for the human staff. No accusations, only facts. Soren's smile returned. "She is mistaken," he said. "She lacks experience." Lady Vesper made a small motion, and the scribe passed her the original ledger. She studied it for a time that felt endless. Then, from beyond the thin wall, came the faint sound of the court stirring, footsteps, soft voices, the hush that preceded a royal presence. Liora felt it like a change in temperature. The air seemed to listen. Lady Vesper's eyes lifted, briefly, toward the wall as if acknowledging that someone important had entered the adjoining hall. Then she returned her attention to the ledger. "Lord Soren," she said at last, "you will provide the shipment receipts by dawn." Soren's expression did not change, but something in his posture tightened. "Of course." Lady Vesper looked at Liora again. "You did well to refuse a false signature," she said. "You may return to your duties." No praise. No reward. Just a statement, calm and final, as if integrity were simply the expected thing. Liora bowed, relief making her knees feel weak. She left the chamber with careful steps, her heart pounding. In the corridor outside, she paused. The door to the Grand Hall stood slightly ajar. She could see only a sliver within, candlelight, dark banners, the curve of a pillar. And behind a veil, just as before, a tall figure stood still. She did not see the king's face. She did not hear his voice. But she felt, with a strange certainty, that someone had witnessed her choice. Not as entertainment. Not as a test. Simply as fact, a human servant had refused to let her name become a lie. The days that followed shifted in small, almost invisible ways. Mara's hall received the proper shipments. Soap returned to the shelves. Flour sacks arrived, full and clean. No one spoke openly about why. Lord Soren stopped appearing in the accounts room. His name vanished from the duty rosters, replaced by another steward who gave instructions without that thin, cutting politeness. There were no rumors of punishment, no dramatic downfall, just an absence, as quiet as the palace itself. And then, one evening, Liora found a sealed note tucked beneath her ink jar. It bore the mark of the Night Chancellor, but the wax was overlaid with a second, older seal, a crescent crowned with thorns. Her breath caught. Everyone in the palace knew that seal, even if they never spoke its name. She broke it carefully. By order of the Crown, the note read, Liora of the human staff is granted free passage through the library wing and the winter gardens, and her duties are to be adjusted accordingly. She is not to be questioned or hindered in these passages. No explanation. No flourish. Just protection, written in the language of policy. Liora sat very still. Her first feeling was not triumph. It was something quieter, the sensation of being seen without being consumed by attention. Later that night, in the winter gardens, a place of pale blossoms that opened under moonlight, Mara joined her for a short rest.